The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, each drop a reminder of the storm that never seemed to end in Alexander Hayes' heart. He stood motionless, a silhouette against the gray Seattle skyline, his reflection barely visible in the glass. The bourbon in his hand had gone warm, untouched for the past hour. Time had become meaningless in the 2 years since the crash. 2 years since Catherine and little Emma had boarded that flight to visit her parents in Boston. 2 years since the news had shattered his world into a million irreparable pieces. The investigators said it was engine failure, a mechanical fault that no one could have predicted. But Alexander knew better. He should have been on that plane. He should have been there to protect them. Instead, he'd stayed behind for a merger that now seemed utterly insignificant. The penthouse that once echoed with Emma's laughter and Catherine's singing now stood as a mausoleum of memories. Every corner held a ghost. Emma's toys remained in her room, untouched, gathering dust like relics in a forgotten temple. Catherine's perfume still sat on the bathroom counter. Alexander couldn't bring himself to move anything, to acknowledge the finality of their absence. His company, Hayes Industries, ran itself these days. His assistant handled the meetings, his board made the decisions, and Alexander signed whatever papers were placed before him. The empire he'd built with such ambition now felt like a prison, golden bars that kept him isolated from a world that had moved on while he remained frozen in grief. The sound of the front door opening barely registered. It was Thursday, which meant Maria came to clean. She'd been working for him for 3 months now, a quiet woman who moved through the apartment like a whisper, never disturbing him, never asking questions. That's why he'd kept her when he dismissed the rest of the staff. He couldn't bear their pitying looks, their careful words, their presence that reminded him he was supposed to be living. But today was different. Today there was another sound. Small footsteps, quick and light, pattering across the marble floor. A child's voice, bright and curious, asking questions in that endless way children do. Alexander's jaw tightened. He'd specifically told Maria to come alone. The apartment was not a place for children. Not anymore. He turned from the window, ready to tell Maria to take her daughter and leave, when he saw her. The little girl couldn't have been more than 3 years old, with dark curls bouncing around her face and eyes that sparkled with wonder. She stood in the middle of his living room, completely unafraid, staring up at the crystal chandelier that hung from the vaulted ceiling. "Mama, look! It's like the stars came inside," she exclaimed, her voice filled with such pure delight that something cracked in Alexander's chest. Maria rushed over, her face flushed with embarrassment and worry. She was 28, young to have a daughter, though Alexander had never asked about her circumstances. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her brown eyes were wide with apology. "Mr. Hayes, I'm so sorry. My babysitter got sick at the last minute, and I couldn't find anyone else. I tried to call, but your phone went to voicemail. I promise she won't be any trouble. Lily, come here right now." Maria's voice shook slightly, fear of losing this job evident in every word. Alexander opened his mouth to tell her this was unacceptable, that she needed to leave immediately and not return until she could work alone. But before he could speak, Lily turned those bright eyes on him. She studied him for a moment with the unsettling perception that children sometimes possess, seeing past the expensive suit and the carefully maintained distance. Then she smiled, a gap-toothed grin that was entirely without guile, and said, "You look sad. Are you sad, mister?" The directness of it stunned him into silence. Adults had spent 2 years tiptoeing around his grief, speaking in hushed tones about his loss and his difficult time, but never addressing it head-on. This child, this tiny person who didn't know anything about social niceties or appropriate boundaries, had simply looked at him and stated the truth. Lily, Maria gasped, horrified. I'm so sorry, Mr. Hayes. She doesn't understand. It's fine, Alexander heard himself say, though his voice sounded strange to his own ears, rusty from disuse. She can stay. The words surprised him as much as they clearly surprised Maria. He saw the relief flood her face, followed quickly by uncertainty. She was probably wondering if he meant it, if he might change his mind. Alexander wondered the same thing. Are you sure, sir? She's very quiet when she wants to be. I'll make sure she doesn't disturb you. She can sit in the kitchen with me. Alexander nodded curtly and turned back to the window, dismissing them. He heard Maria murmur instructions to Lily, the sound of their footsteps retreating toward the kitchen. He tried to return to his contemplation of the rain, to the familiar numbness that had become his default state. But he found his attention drawn to the sounds from the kitchen. Maria's gentle voice explaining that she needed to work, that Lily needed to color quietly in her book. Lily's cheerful agreement, followed by the scrape of a chair being pulled across the tile floor. The domestic normalcy of it felt almost invasive. Alexander lasted 15 minutes before his curiosity got the better of him. He moved silently to where he could observe the kitchen without being seen. Maria was cleaning the counters with her usual efficiency, though he noticed she kept glancing at her daughter. Lily sat at the kitchen island, her little legs swinging, completely absorbed in her coloring book. She hummed tunelessly to herself, a happy sound that seemed out of place in this house of silence. As he watched, Lily held up her picture for Maria to see. It was the typical child's drawing, all bright colors and enthusiastic scribbles, but Maria's face lit up as if her daughter had created a masterpiece. That's beautiful, honey. Is that our house?
No, Mama.
That's a castle. And that's you. And that's me. And we're princesses. Lily pointed to two stick figures with triangular dresses. Maria smiled, but Alexander saw the sadness behind it. Princesses, huh? That sounds nice. And we have lots of food, and you don't have to work all the time, and we can play every day. The innocence in Lily's voice carried dreams that Alexander suspected were far from Maria's reality. Something about the scene bothered him, nagged at his conscience in a way he hadn't felt in years. He realized he knew almost nothing about Maria beyond her efficiency as a housekeeper. He'd never asked if she had family, what her circumstances were, whether she struggled to make ends meet. Before Catherine and Emma, he wouldn't have thought twice about it. Employees were employees, their personal lives irrelevant as long as they did their jobs. But loss had a way of making you see things differently, of making you aware of the fragility of happiness, the importance of the moments you might otherwise overlook. Alexander retreated to his study, but for the first time in months, he found himself unable to lose himself in the comfortable fog of grief. The sound of Lily's humming drifted through the apartment, a reminder that life continued, that joy still existed somewhere in the world. The next Thursday, Alexander found himself listening for the sound of the door. Maria had texted to confirm she'd have Lily with her again, apologizing profusely. He'd replied simply, "It's fine." And it was, though he couldn't quite explain why. When they arrived, Lily burst through the door with the enthusiasm only a 3-year-old could muster, her little backpack bouncing on her shoulders. She was wearing a pink jacket that had seen better days, and her shoes were scuffed at the toes. But her face was bright with excitement. "Mama, it's the Star House," she exclaimed, and Alexander realized that's what she'd named his penthouse. The Star House because of the chandelier. This time, he didn't pretend to ignore them. He stood in the living room as Maria helped Lily out of her jacket, and when the little girl spotted him, she waved enthusiastically. "Hi, sad mister. I brought you something." She dug into her backpack and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. Before Maria could stop her, Lily had run over to Alexander and thrust the paper into his hand. It was a drawing, similar to the one he'd seen her making last week. Stick figures and bright colors. But this one showed 3 people instead of 2. One tall figure labeled in wobbly letters "Sad Mister," and 2 smaller ones labeled Lily and Mama. All 3 were smiling, surrounded by what he assumed were flowers or possibly stars. "It's for you," Lily explained seriously. "To make you not sad. Pictures always make me feel better when I'm sad." Alexander stared at the drawing, something tight and painful forming in his throat. No one had given him anything in 2 years that wasn't business-related. No one had tried to make him feel better. They'd all just given him space, distance, the cold comfort of being left alone with his grief. "Lily, you don't bother Mr. Hayes with," Maria started, moving to retrieve her daughter. "Thank you," Alexander interrupted, his voice rough. "It's very nice. I'll keep it." Lily beamed at him, clearly delighted that her gift had been accepted. Maria looked stunned, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. Alexander carefully set the drawing on the side table, treating it with more care than he'd given to most things in recent memory. Over the following weeks, a pattern developed. Maria came every Thursday, and Lily came with her. At first, Alexander would retreat to his study, maintaining his distance. But gradually, he found himself spending more time in the common areas while they were there. Lily had a gift for filling silence. She talked constantly, a running commentary on everything she saw and thought. She told him about the bird she saw on the way to the Star House, about her favorite color which changed daily, about how she wanted a puppy but they couldn't have one in their apartment. Alexander learned that they lived in a small one-bedroom in a less desirable part of the city. Lily slept on a pull-out couch. Maria worked 3 jobs, cleaning for Alexander and 2 other households, struggling to make rent and save for a better situation. Lily's father wasn't in the picture, a subject Maria delicately avoided whenever it came up. He also learned that despite their circumstances, Lily was happy. She possessed an irrepressible joy that seemed to come from some inexhaustible well within her. She found wonder in the smallest things, the way the afternoon light came through the windows, the feel of the soft carpet under her bare feet, the endless fascination of the few toys Maria allowed her to bring. One Thursday, about 2 months after Lily's first visit, Alexander found her in Emma's room. The door had been closed since the accident, and he'd assumed it was locked. Apparently not. His first instinct was anger, a fierce protective surge that this was sacred ground being violated. But when he reached the doorway, he froze. Lily sat on the floor surrounded by Emma's toys, handling each one with a reverence that seemed beyond her years. She wasn't playing roughly or carelessly. She was examining each toy carefully, arranging them in neat rows, treating them like treasures. "These are beautiful," she whispered to herself. "Someone must have loved them very much." Maria appeared behind Alexander, her face pale with horror when she saw where her daughter was. "Oh my God. Lily, I told you not to go into any rooms with closed doors. Mr. Hayes, I'm so incredibly sorry. I was just in the bathroom for a minute. I didn't realize." Alexander held up a hand to stop her. He surprised himself by walking into the room, something he hadn't done since Catherine's mother had packed it up after the funeral, preserving it exactly as Emma had left it. He sat down on the floor next to Lily, his expensive suit jacket be damned. Lily looked up at him with those perceptive eyes. "Did these belong to your little girl?" she asked softly. The question hit him like a physical blow. He'd never told her about Emma, about Catherine. How did she know? "Yes," he managed to say. "Where is she?" She's gone. She died." Lily processed this information with the serious expression children get when confronted with concepts too big for them to fully grasp. Like my goldfish died?
Yes.
Like that. I was very sad when my goldfish died. Mama said he went to heaven where all the good goldfish go. She paused, then reached out and patted Alexander's hand with her tiny one. Did your little girl go to heaven too? I hope so. Then she's probably very happy there. And she's not sad anymore. Lily said this with such certainty, such simple faith, that Alexander felt tears sting his eyes for the first time since the funeral. Maria made a small sound in the doorway, and when Alexander looked at her, he saw tears streaming down her face too. She mouthed, "I'm sorry," again, but Alexander shook his head. This wasn't something to apologize for. "Would you like to play with these toys?" he asked Lily, the words coming from somewhere deep inside him that he'd thought had died with his family. Lily's eyes widened. Really? Are you sure?
Yes.
I think she would have liked that. Sharing with someone who would appreciate them. For the next hour, Alexander sat on the floor of his daughter's room while Lily played. She narrated elaborate stories involving the stuffed animals, assigned voices to the dolls, built towers with the blocks. And slowly, tentatively, he began to participate. He couldn't remember the last time he'd played, the last time he'd engaged with anything that didn't involve business or bourbon. The change in Alexander didn't happen overnight, but it was undeniable. His assistant noticed that he'd started attending meetings in person again. His board members remarked that he seemed more engaged with company decisions. But the real transformation was visible only on Thursdays, when a little girl with dark curls brought light back into the Star House. Lily had become a fixture in Alexander's life in a way he never could have anticipated. She no longer stayed confined to the kitchen with Maria. Instead, she had the run of the penthouse, and Alexander found himself looking forward to her visits with an intensity that both comforted and frightened him. He'd started buying things for her. At first, small things. Crayons and coloring books to replace the worn ones she brought from home. Then bigger things. Art supplies, toys, books. Maria had initially protested, uncomfortable with her employer showering her daughter with gifts, but Alexander had been insistent. "Let me do this," he'd said.
Please.
There was something in his voice, a rawness that made Maria reluctant to refuse him. She understood, perhaps better than most, what it meant to need something desperately. If giving gifts to Lily helped Alexander heal, who was she to deny him that? But Maria was also beginning to worry. She saw the way Alexander's face transformed when Lily ran to greet him, the way he smiled, genuinely smiled, for the first time since she'd known him. She saw how he saved his lunch breaks for Thursdays so he could eat with them, how he'd started working from home on those days instead of going to the office. She worried because she knew this couldn't last forever. She worried because Lily was getting attached, calling Alexander Mr. Alex now instead of Sad Mr. She worried because she could see her daughter's innocent heart opening to this man who had so much pain inside him, and she knew that loving people who were grieving was complicated and risky. But most of all, Maria worried because she was getting attached too. Not in a romantic sense, she was careful about that line. But she'd come to care deeply about this broken man who was trying so hard to put himself back together. She'd seen glimpses of who he must have been before the tragedy, moments of dry humor, flashes of the sharp intelligence that had built his empire, softness in his eyes when he looked at Lily that spoke of the father he'd been. One Thursday in early spring, everything shifted. Lily had been unusually quiet that day, and Maria had noticed she felt warm to the touch. But her daughter had insisted she was fine, excited to visit the Star House as always. They'd barely been there an hour when Lily suddenly started crying, complaining that her head hurt and her tummy felt bad. Maria immediately started gathering their things, apologizing to Alexander. "I'm so sorry. I need to take her home. I'll make up the hours next week." But before they could leave, Lily threw up and then started crying harder, clearly frightened and feeling miserable. Alexander surprised them both by immediately taking charge. "My car's downstairs. I'm driving you to the hospital." "Mr. Hayes, that's not necessary. We can take the bus." "Maria, please. Let me help." During the car ride, Alexander held Lily while Maria sat beside them, worry etched on her face. Lily had started running a high fever, alternating between crying and a drowsy quiet that was more alarming than the tears. At the hospital, Alexander's name and obvious wealth moved them through triage quickly, and within minutes, Lily was being examined by a pediatrician. It turned out to be a severe case of the flu, concerning because of how quickly Lily's fever had spiked, but treatable. The doctor recommended hospitalization for observation overnight, just to be safe. Maria's face crumpled when she heard this, and Alexander realized she was doing calculations in her head, trying to figure out how she'd pay for a hospital stay. "I'll take care of it," Alexander said quietly. "Mr. Hayes, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm offering."
Please, Maria.
"Let me do this." They admitted Lily to pediatrics, and Maria refused to leave her side. Alexander excused himself, supposedly to make work calls, but when he returned an hour later, the nurse informed Maria that the hospital bill had been taken care of and that a private room had been arranged instead of the shared ward room they'd been assigned. Maria found him in the hallway outside Lily's room. "Mr. Hayes, this is too much. I can pay my own daughter's medical bills." "With what money?" he asked bluntly. "I know what I pay you, Maria, and I know it's barely enough to cover your rent and basic expenses. I also know you've been working yourself to exhaustion trying to save for a better apartment, trying to give Lily a better life. Let me help." "Why?" Maria's voice broke on the word. "Why are you doing all this? The gifts, the money, the attention? I'm grateful. Truly I am, but I don't understand. Is this charity?"
Pity.
Alexander was quiet for a long moment. 2 years ago, I stopped wanting to live. I didn't actively want to die, but I didn't care about living either. I was going through the motions, waiting for, I don't know what. For the pain to stop, maybe. For it all to just end. He met her eyes. "And then your daughter drew me a picture to make me not sad."
Such a small thing, right?
A child's drawing. But it was the first time since the crash that anyone had tried to make me feel better instead of just leaving me alone with my grief. He looked through the window at Lily, sleeping now, her small form dwarfed by the hospital bed. "She gave me a reason to care again, Maria. Every Thursday, I had something to look forward to. Someone who needed me, even if it was just to appreciate her toys or listen to her stories. Someone who saw me as a person, not as a grieving widower or a wealthy CEO or any other label. Just someone who might play with her or smile at her pictures." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "She talks about you all the time, about Mr. Alex and the Star House. She asks when we're going to visit you even on days that aren't Thursday. Then let me be part of her life, part of both your lives. Not as your employer or as charity, as a friend, as someone who cares about what happens to you." Alexander's voice was earnest in a way Maria had never heard before. "Let me help because I want to, because it makes me feel like a human being again instead of a ghost haunting my own life." Before Maria could respond, a doctor approached them. "Mrs. Torres? Your daughter is asking for you." "It's Miss," Maria corrected automatically, then hurried into the room. Alexander followed, stopping in the doorway. Lily was awake, looking small and pale against the white hospital sheets. But when she saw Alexander, her face brightened. "Mr. Alex, you came too." "Of course I did. How are you feeling, sweetheart?" The endearment slipped out naturally, and Alexander saw Maria's expression shift, something complicated passing across her face. But she didn't comment on it. My tummy still hurts, but the nice nurse gave me medicine. She said I have to stay here tonight. Lily's lower lip trembled. I don't like hospitals. I know, Alexander said, moving to sit in the chair on the other side of her bed. But your mama's here, and I'm here, and tomorrow you'll feel much better. Promise. Promise. Lily seemed satisfied with this. She reached for both their hands, holding Maria's with her right and Alexander's with her left. Will you tell me a story, Mr. Alex? Mama's stories are good, but you have different stories. Alexander glanced at Maria, who nodded encouragingly. And so he found himself telling Lily about the time he was young and tried to build a treehouse, which had collapsed spectacularly. He made it funny, emphasizing his own foolishness, and Lily giggled despite feeling poorly. As the afternoon faded into evening, Maria dozed in her chair, exhausted from worry and from her usual 3 jobs. Alexander continued to sit with Lily, telling her stories, listening to her drowsy commentary. At some point, a nurse brought him coffee and a blanket, clearly assuming he was Lily's father. He didn't correct her. After the hospital incident, something fundamental shifted in the dynamic between Alexander, Maria, and Lily. The boundaries that Maria had carefully maintained began to blur, not into something inappropriate, but into something that resembled family. Alexander increased Maria's salary substantially, insisting it was long overdue and had nothing to do with Lily's hospitalization. He also reduced her hours, suggesting she quit her other 2 cleaning jobs. Maria protested initially, but Alexander pointed out that she was exhausted all the time, that Lily needed her mother present and rested, and that he could easily afford to pay her enough to make that possible. Think of it as a promotion, he'd said. You're not just a housekeeper anymore. You keep me organized, make sure I eat actual meals instead of just coffee, coordinate my household affairs. That's worth more than what I was paying you. It was a kind fiction, and they both knew it, but Maria accepted because she wanted to believe it. Because she was tired, desperately tired, and the thought of spending more time with Lily instead of always rushing from one job to the next was too tempting to refuse. With Maria working fewer hours elsewhere, Lily's visits to the Star House became more frequent. At first, it was Thursdays and Saturdays. Then Alexander suggested they come for Sunday dinners. Then he mentioned that he worked from home most days now and wouldn't mind the company during the week. Before long, Maria and Lily were at the penthouse 4 or 5 days a week. Maria still cleaned and organized, maintaining the pretense that this was a professional arrangement, but increasingly she found herself simply keeping Alexander company. They'd have coffee together in the mornings while Lily played. They discussed the news, share stories about their lives, talk about anything and everything. Alexander learned that Maria had come from a small town in Oregon, that she'd fallen in love at 19 with a man who'd promised her the world and delivered nothing but a baby and a broken heart. He learned that she loved to read but rarely had time for it, that she'd wanted to be a teacher but couldn't afford college, that her own parents had died when she was 23, leaving her truly alone in the world with a baby daughter. Maria learned that Alexander had built his company from nothing, that he'd met Catherine in college and known immediately she was the one, that being a father had been the greatest joy of his life. She learned about his guilt over the crash, his belief that he should have been on that plane. She learned that he'd been in therapy, but stopped going because talking about it just made it hurt more. Maybe it's supposed to hurt, Maria suggested one morning as they sat on his balcony while Lily napped. Maybe that's how you know you really love them. If it didn't hurt, that would mean it didn't matter. Alexander considered this. Do you ever stop hurting? I don't know. I hurt when I think about my parents even now. But it's different than it was at first. Less like an open wound, more like an old scar that aches sometimes. Maria paused. My hurt is different from yours, though. I lost people who'd lived full lives. You lost your future. I lost Emma's future, Alexander corrected quietly. She was only 6. She should have had decades ahead of her. First days of school, graduations, falling in love, having her own family someday. I lost all of that. All the moments I'll never get to see. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of that loss hanging between them. Then, from inside, they heard Lily stirring and her sleepy voice calling for Maria. The moment of heavy grief passed, pulled back by the needs of the present. This was how it went. Alexander would have moments where the past crashed over him like a wave, and Maria would sit with him through it, neither minimizing his pain nor being frightened by its intensity. And in return, when Maria had moments of worry about money or the future or whether she was doing right by Lily, Alexander would listen and help where he could. But not everyone approved of the arrangement. Mrs. Patterson, the building's busybody who lived 2 floors down, had noticed that Maria and Lily were at Alexander's penthouse with increasing frequency. She'd mentioned it to the doorman, who'd mentioned it to the building manager, who felt obligated to mention it to Alexander out of concern. I just wanted to make sure everything was appropriate, Mr. Hayes, the manager said carefully. The other residents have noticed that your housekeeper brings her daughter quite frequently, and they're staying for extended periods. There's no rule against it, of course, but people do talk. Alexander's expression could have frozen fire. What exactly are they saying? The manager shifted uncomfortably. Nothing specific, sir. Just questions about the nature of the relationship. Whether it's appropriate for a young woman and her child to be spending so much time in a single man's apartment. You understand how it looks. No, I don't understand. Please explain to me how it looks. Sir, I'm not making any accusations. You're simply implying that there's something untoward happening because a man is being kind to a single mother and her child. You're suggesting that basic human decency and compassion are suspicious behaviors. Alexander's voice was cold. I'm going to say this once, and you can relay it to Mrs. Patterson and anyone else who's interested in my private life. Maria Torres is my employee and my friend. Her daughter is a child who I care about deeply. What we do in my apartment is none of anyone's business. If people have a problem with that, they're welcome to move out of the building. I own it, after all. The manager left hastily, and Alexander assumed that would be the end of it. But rumors, once started, are difficult to stop. He began noticing the looks when Maria and Lily were with him in the lobby. The whispers that stopped when he walked by. The judgment in people's eyes. Maria noticed too. She became more uncomfortable about their arrangement, more insistent on maintaining professional boundaries. She stopped joining Alexander for coffee in the mornings, instead cleaning while he worked. She suggested that maybe they should reduce Lily's visits back to just once a week. They're talking, Mr. Hayes. People are saying things. About me, about you, about the situation. I don't want to cause you any problems. I don't care what they say. But I do. Maria's voice rose. Then she caught herself, glancing at where Lily was playing in the next room. More quietly, she continued, You're a public figure, Mr. Hayes. A billionaire. And I'm your housekeeper. People are going to assume the worst. They're going to think I'm using you or that you're taking advantage. Either way, it makes us both look bad. Then let them think what they want. I know the truth. You know the truth. That should be enough. But it wasn't enough for Maria. She had pride, and she had been through too much in her life to willingly subject herself to gossip and judgment. She started pulling back, creating distance, and Alexander could feel it happening, but didn't know how to stop it without confirming what people were whispering about. Lily noticed too, in the way children notice everything even when adults think they're oblivious. Why don't we go to the Star House as much anymore? she asked her mother one evening. We still go, sweetie. We were just there yesterday. But not like before. Before we went all the time. And you don't smile as much when we're there. Did Mr. Alex do something bad?
No, baby.
Mr. Alex didn't do anything bad. Then why are you sad when you look at him? Maria didn't have an answer for that. How could she explain to a 3-year-old the complications of adult relationships, the weight of social judgment, the fear of crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed? How could she explain that she was pulling away from Alexander precisely because she cared about him, because she could see how people's gossip was affecting him even if he claimed not to care? The truth was, Maria was terrified. Terrified of getting too comfortable in a life that wasn't really hers. Terrified of Lily becoming too attached to a man who, at the end of the day, was their employer. Terrified of her own growing feelings for Alexander, feelings that went beyond friendship, but that she refused to examine too closely because that way lay heartbreak. She'd been down that road before with Lily's father, believing in promises of stability and family, only to end up alone and struggling. She couldn't afford to make that mistake again, especially not with someone so far above her station, someone who lived in a different world. So she pulled back, even though it hurt. Even though she saw the confusion and pain in Alexander's eyes. Even though Lily asked every day when they could visit Mr. Alex again, and why Mama seemed so sad. The distance Maria tried to create didn't work the way she'd hoped. Instead of making things simpler, it made everything more complicated. Lily became clingy and tearful, not understanding why their visits to the Star House had become so brief and formal. Alexander threw himself back into work with an intensity that worried his assistant, staying at the office until midnight, taking on projects that didn't need his personal attention. And Maria felt like she was being torn in two. Every Thursday when she came to clean, she could see the evidence of Alexander's isolation. Untouched meals from the delivery service he'd signed up for. The lights in Emma's room left on, as if he'd been in there. The bourbon glass on the coffee table, something she hadn't seen in months. He was slipping back into the darkness she'd watched him climb out of, and it was her fault. Her fear, her pride, her determination to protect herself and Lily had hurt the one person who'd shown them nothing but kindness. 2 weeks into this new, painful normal, Maria made a decision. She went to Alexander's penthouse on a Tuesday, not her usual day. Lily was at a free daycare program run by the community center, giving Maria a few hours. She needed to have this conversation without her daughter present. Alexander answered the door, looking disheveled in a way she'd never seen before. His hair was uncombed, his shirt wrinkled, and there was stubble on his jaw. Maria? It's not Thursday.
I know.
Can I come in? We need to talk. He stepped aside wordlessly, and she entered the penthouse that had become so familiar to her. It looked different now, less cared for. There were papers scattered on the coffee table, dishes in the sink, a general air of neglect. I'm sorry the place is a mess, Alexander said automatically. I wasn't expecting. Stop, Maria interrupted. Please, just stop. Stop being so polite, stop maintaining this distance. I can't take it anymore. Alexander looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw her own exhaustion reflected in his eyes. Then what do you want, Maria? Because I'm trying to respect your boundaries, trying to give you the professional relationship you seem to want, but it's killing me. Seeing you for an hour once a week, pretending we're just employer and employee when we both know. He stopped himself. When we both know what? Maria prompted softly. That it's more than that. That it has been for a while now. Alexander ran his hand through his hair. Look, I know the rumors bother you. I know people talk. But I don't care what they think, Maria. I care about you. About Lily. You've both become the most important people in my life, and I can't just turn that off because it makes other people uncomfortable. I don't want you to turn it off, Maria admitted, her voice breaking. God, Alexander, do you think this has been easy for me? Do you think I wanted to create this distance? I'm terrified. Terrified of what people say about me. Yes, but more terrified of getting comfortable in your life, in this penthouse, in a world that isn't mine. Because what happens when you don't need us anymore? What happens when you heal completely and realize you don't need a stand-in family? Lily will be heartbroken. And I. She trailed off, unable to finish. And you. Alexander moved closer to her. What about you, Maria? I'll be heartbroken too, she whispered. I'm already halfway there. Every time Lily talks about you, every time she asks why we don't see Mr. Alex as much, it hurts. Because I know I'm the one creating this distance, and I know it's hurting all three of us, but I don't know what else to do. You could trust me, Alexander said. You could trust that this isn't about replacement or substitution. That what I feel for you and Lily isn't, because you're filling some void left by Catherine and Emma. You could trust that I know the difference, that I'm not confused about my feelings. How can you be sure? You're still grieving, Alexander. You're still in so much pain. How do you know what you're feeling is real and not just need? Because I've spent 2 years in pain, Alexander said quietly. I know what grief feels like. I know what numbness feels like. I know what despair feels like. And this. He gestured between them. This feels like hope. This feels like maybe I get to have a future after all. Different from the one I lost. Not a replacement for it, but a future nonetheless. You and Lily didn't make me forget Catherine and Emma. You made me want to live again. That's not the same thing. Maria felt tears streaming down her face. I'm so scared of messing this up. Of not being enough. I'm just a housekeeper with a kid, Alexander. I don't belong in your world. My world is empty without you in it, Alexander said simply. And you're not just anything, Maria. You're brilliant and strong, and you've raised an incredible daughter despite circumstances that would have broken most people. You're the person who sat with me in a hospital waiting room all night. You're the person who listened to me talk about Catherine and Emma without ever making me feel like I should be over it by now. You're the person who made me want to be better, do better. He took her hands in his. I'm not asking you to be anyone other than who you are. I'm not asking you to fit into some preconceived notion of what should be. I'm just asking you to stop running from this, from us. Whatever this is, or could be. Maria looked up at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability. This man who commanded boardrooms and built empires was laying his heart bare to her, and she realized that her fear was the only thing standing between them and happiness. Okay, she said softly. Okay, I'll stop running. But Alexander, you need to understand something. Lily comes first. Always. Whatever happens between us, whatever this becomes, my daughter's well-being is my priority. I wouldn't want it any other way, Alexander assured her. In fact, I think we should talk to her. Explain that things are going to change, that we're going to spend more time together, that our relationship is evolving. She deserves honesty. She's 3. Maria laughed through her tears. I'm not sure how much she'll understand. She understood enough to ask you why you were sad when you looked at me. Kids are perceptive. Let's give her credit for that. So that evening, they sat down with Lily in the Star House. The little girl was so excited to be back, to have both Maria and Alexander there together, that she bounced between them like a pinball. Lily, sweetie, we need to talk to you about something, Maria started. Lily immediately sobered, her face taking on that serious expression. Am I in trouble? No, baby, not at all. We just want to explain some things that are going to change. Are we moving to the Star House? Lily asked hopefully. Maria and Alexander exchanged glances. They hadn't discussed logistics at all. "We haven't talked about that yet," Maria said carefully. "But Mr. Alex and I want to spend more time together. All three of us. Would you like that?"
Yes.
"Can we come here every day?" "Maybe not every day," Alexander interjected, "but much more often than we have been. And Lily, I want you to know that you and your mama are very important to me."
You're my family now.
"Do you understand what that means?" Lily nodded solemnly. "Family means you love each other and take care of each other." "That's exactly right. And I love both of you very much." Lily threw her arms around Alexander's neck. "I love you too, Mr. Alex. Does this mean you're not sad anymore?" Alexander hugged her tight, looking over her head at Maria. "I'm still sad sometimes, sweetheart. I'll probably always be a little sad about the people I lost. But I'm happy too now, because I have you and your mama." "Can I call you Daddy?" Lily asked suddenly. The question hung in the air. Maria looked panicked, starting to say that maybe that was moving too fast, but Alexander spoke first. "How about we start with Alex?" "No, mister. And then, if someday you want to call me something else, we can talk about it. Is that okay?" Lily seemed satisfied with this compromise. "Okay, Alex." She tested out his name, giggling. "Alex, Alex, Alex." Later, after Lily had fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted from excitement, Maria and Alexander sat together on the balcony, similar to how they'd sat many times before, but different now. "Thank you," Maria said, "for handling that question well. I didn't know what to say. It's a big thing for a child to ask. We should take it seriously and not rush it." Alexander paused. "But Maria, I want you to know that the idea doesn't scare me. Being a father figure to Lily, I mean, if that's where this goes eventually. You already are in many ways. She adores you. I adore her too. She saved my life, you know. Both of you did." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights. After a while, Alexander reached for Maria's hand, and she let him take it. The next few months unfolded like a dream. Maria and Lily moved into the penthouse, initially into the guest wing, though Alexander had made it clear that the arrangement was flexible and they could redefine spaces as needed. Maria insisted on continuing to contribute to the household, though her role had evolved far beyond housekeeping. The gossip in the building initially intensified with their move, but Alexander had meant what he said about not caring. When Mrs. Patterson made a snide comment about young opportunists in the elevator one day, Alexander had calmly informed her that Maria was more of a lady than anyone in the building, including Mrs. Patterson, and if she had further comments, she could take them up with his lawyer. Mrs. Patterson had turned red and exited at the next floor, and the gossip had largely died down after that. People realized that Alexander Hayes wasn't going to be shamed into abandoning his new family, and most of them had better things to do than continue speculating. Lily thrived in her new environment. She had her own room now, decorated exactly how she wanted with input from both Maria and Alexander. She attended a good preschool, had regular playdates with other children, and continued to bring light and laughter into the Star House every single day. Alexander watched her with a mixture of joy and pain. He was healing, truly healing, but that didn't mean he'd forgotten. Emma's room remained as it had been, and sometimes he would go in there and sit, remembering. Maria understood this need and never tried to rush him past it. One evening, about 6 months after they'd become a family, Lily came to Alexander with one of Emma's old dolls. "Alex, can I play with this?" "Of course, sweetheart. You can play with any of the toys in there. But they belong to your daughter, the one who went to heaven." They did, but I think she'd want someone to enjoy them. She was a very generous girl, always sharing with her friends. Lily considered this seriously. "What was her name?"
Emma.
Her name was Emma. That's a pretty name. Lily hugged the doll close. I'll take really good care of her dolls. I promise. I know you will. Later that night, after Lily was in bed, Alexander found Maria in the kitchen. She was making tea, a nighttime ritual she developed. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. I've been thinking, he said. Dangerous pastime, Maria teased. I want to marry you. Maria went very still. Alexander. I know it's fast by some standards. I know people will say I'm rushing things, that I'm not over Catherine yet, that I should wait longer. But I also know that life is short and precious, and I don't want to waste time on shoulds and suppose toes. I love you, Maria. I love Lily. I want to make this official, make us a real family. Maria turned in his arms to face him. We already are a real family. We don't need a marriage certificate for that. No, we don't.
But I want it anyway.
I want to stand up in front of everyone and say that you're mine and I'm yours. I want Lily to have my name if she wants it. I want the whole world to know that I choose you, every day, for the rest of my life. Tears filled Maria's eyes. What about Catherine?
Emma?
They'll always be part of me, part of my history, my heart. But you're my future, Maria. You and Lily. There's room in my heart for all of you. Love doesn't work on a limited capacity. It expands. I never thought I'd get this, Maria whispered. A second chance at family, at love. I thought I'd used my opportunity when Lily's father left. He was a fool, and his loss is my gain. Alexander kissed her softly. So, what do you say? Will you marry me? Yes, Maria said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, of course, yes. They told Lily the next morning. Her reaction was everything they could have hoped for and more. She jumped up and down, shrieking with excitement, asking a million questions about weddings and dresses and whether she could be a flower girl. You can be whatever you want to be, Alexander told her, scooping her up and spinning her around. Can I call you Daddy now? Lily asked. Alexander looked at Maria, who nodded with tears in her eyes. Yes, sweetheart. You can call me Daddy now. Lily practiced saying it over and over. Daddy, 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 like it was the best word she'd ever learned. And in Alexander's heart, something that had been broken began to truly heal. The wedding was small and intimate, just a few close friends and business associates. Alexander's former in-laws came, Catherine's parents. Maria had been terrified to meet them, afraid they'd see her as a replacement, but they'd been kind and welcoming. Alexander needs this, Catherine's mother had told her privately. He needs you and that beautiful little girl. Catherine would want him to be happy again. She loved him too much to want him to stay frozen in grief forever. The ceremony took place in the penthouse, with the chandeliers sparkling above them like indoor stars. Lily stood beside them in a white dress, holding a basket of flower petals and beaming. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, she cheered louder than anyone. That night, after the celebration had ended and Lily was asleep, Alexander and Maria stood on the balcony, looking out at the city. Maria wore her wedding ring, a simple band that Alexander had chosen because it reminded him of starlight, and she couldn't stop looking at it. Happy? Alexander asked. Terrified, Maria admitted. But yes, incredibly happy. You?
Same.
Terrified that I'll wake up and this will have been a dream. Happy that I get another chance at this, at family and love and a future. It's not a replacement, Maria said, echoing a fear she knew they both still carried sometimes.
No, it's not.
It's different.
New.
But that doesn't make it less real or less important. Alexander pulled her close. I loved Catherine and Emma with everything I had. And now I love you and Lily with everything I have. My heart didn't shrink. It grew. They stood there together, two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of pain and loss, who'd built something beautiful from the broken pieces of their lives. Inside, a little girl slept peacefully, dreaming of living in a star house with a mama and a daddy who loved her more than anything. The story could have ended there, with a happily ever after that everyone hopes for. But life is never quite that simple. A few weeks after the wedding, Alexander received an unexpected call. It was from an investigator who'd been working on the plane crash that killed Catherine and Emma. There was new evidence, he said. The crash might not have been an accident after all. There were indications of sabotage, possibly connected to Alexander's business dealings, to a competitor who'd wanted to damage him. The news hit Alexander like a physical blow. All this time, he'd carried guilt for not being on that plane, for surviving when they didn't. But if someone had deliberately caused the crash, if Catherine and Emma had been murdered because of him. Maria found him in Emma's room, sitting on the floor, his face ashen. "Alexander, what's wrong?" He told her about the call, about the investigation, about the possibility that his family had been murdered. "It's my fault," he said, his voice hollow. "Someone killed them to hurt me. Because of my business, my success, my enemies. They died because of me." "No," Maria said firmly, sitting down beside him and taking his hands. "No, Alexander. If this is true, if someone did this deliberately, then they died because someone made an evil choice. That's not on you. You didn't put them on that plane to hurt them. You didn't cause the crash. Someone else did. But they were targeted because of me. Stop.
Stop doing this to yourself.
You can't control other people's actions, their choices, their evil. You can only control your own choices. And you chose to love Catherine and Emma with everything you had. You chose to be a good husband and father. You chose to build a life with them. That's what matters." Alexander looked at her, this strong woman who'd become his anchor. "How do you always know what to say?" "I don't. I just know what I'd want someone to say to me if our positions were reversed."
She squeezed his hands.
"Whatever comes from this investigation, whatever they find, we'll deal with it together. You're not alone in this anymore." Over the following months, the investigation continued. It was indeed sabotage, orchestrated by a rival company that had wanted to force Alexander into a merger. The responsible parties were arrested, charged, tried. Alexander attended every hearing, needing to see justice done, even though it couldn't bring back what he'd lost. It was a painful process, reopening wounds that had started to heal. But Maria was there through all of it, and so was Lily, in her own innocent way. Lily would climb into Alexander's lap when he was having a hard day, patting his face and telling him stories about her day at preschool, pulling him back into the present with her 3-year-old wisdom. The trial concluded with convictions, and while Alexander felt some satisfaction in justice being served, he also felt exhausted. He'd spent so much energy on anger and grief and the need for answers. Now finally he could let it go. "It doesn't change anything," he told Maria one night. "Knowing why, knowing who, they're still gone." "But maybe now you can forgive yourself," Maria suggested gently. "You weren't responsible for their deaths. Someone evil was. You were just a man who loved his family. There's no guilt in that." And slowly, painfully, Alexander began to truly believe that. The nightmares that had plagued him for years began to fade. The constant undercurrent of guilt began to ease. He started to allow himself moments of pure happiness without immediately feeling like he was betraying Catherine and Emma's memory. One Sunday afternoon, about a year after the wedding, Alexander was playing with Lily in the living room. She was 4 now, full of energy and questions and opinions. They were building an elaborate block tower when Lily suddenly stopped and looked at him seriously. "Daddy, do you think Emma would like me?" The question caught Alexander off guard. Lily rarely brought up Emma, though she knew about her, saw her pictures around the apartment, understood in a child's way that Alexander had had another daughter before her. "I think she would love you," Alexander said honestly. "You're kind and funny and smart, just like she was. I think you two would have been great friends. I wish I could have met her. And your other wife, Catherine. I wish you could have too. But then you wouldn't have met me and Mama, right? Because you were already married?" Alexander considered this paradox, the impossible nature of wishing he could have both families while knowing one precluded the other. "That's true. I can't have both. But I can love both. I can be grateful for the time I had with Catherine and Emma, and grateful for the time I have with you and Mama. It's okay to have more than one family in a lifetime." Lily processed this, then nodded as if it made perfect sense to her.
Okay.
"I'm going to make Emma a picture to put in her room, so she knows I think about her." And she did, drawing one of her characteristic elaborate scenes with stick figures and bright colors. When it was done, Alexander hung it in Emma's room alongside Emma's own artwork, and he felt a sense of peace wash over him. His past and present weren't at war with each other. They could coexist, inform each other, make him who he was. That night, he held Maria close and whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" "For being patient with me. For understanding that healing isn't linear, that I needed to work through all of this in my own time and my own way. For not asking me to forget them or pretend they didn't matter." "They're part of who you are," Maria said simply. "I fell in love with all of you, including the parts that are still grieving, still loving them. I wouldn't want you to forget them. That would mean forgetting a huge part of your heart." Years passed. Lily grew from a preschooler into a bright, compassionate young girl. She called Alexander Daddy without hesitation, loved him fiercely, and was loved just as fiercely in return. Maria and Alexander built a life together, full of the normal ups and downs of any marriage, but grounded in genuine love and mutual respect. Alexander never forgot Catherine and Emma. Their pictures stayed up, their memories were honored, their loss was acknowledged. But he also learned to live fully in his present, to be grateful for second chances, to understand that the heart's capacity for love was infinite. On the anniversary of the crash, they started a tradition. They'd go to the memorial park where Catherine and Emma were honored, and they'd bring flowers. Lily would tell stories about school, about her friends, about her life. Maria would share updates on the foundation they'd started in Catherine and Emma's names, helping single mothers and their children. And Alexander would talk to his lost family, telling them about his life now, about Maria and Lily, about how he'd found a way to live again. And he'd learned that the most important thing wasn't how you fell down, but who was there to help you stand back up. Maria and Lily had been there for him, and now he was here for them, and together they'd built something beautiful from the broken pieces of their lives. The story of how a lonely billionaire found healing through a maid's daughter wasn't really about wealth or status or dramatic rescue. It was about the simple, profound truth that we all need each other, that kindness matters, that love really is bigger than sadness, and that second chances, when we're brave enough to take them, can transform everything. In the end, it wasn't about ignoring or forgetting the past. It was about learning to carry it forward into a future that honored both what was lost and what was found. And in that balance, Alexander Hayes discovered something he thought he'd lost forever: the ability to truly live again.